At the ANC's land summit held in Boksburg over the weekend had recommended that the state begin expropriating land without compensation immediately within the current limitations of the Constitution. The proposal seeks to begin testing the limits of Section 25 of the Constitution. The party's National Executive Committee will consider the proposals when it meets this weekend. Well, we're joined now in the studio by the party spokesperson, Pule Mabe. Good evening to you and thank you for joining us. I mean, there have been a number of experts who've pronounced on this. The DA are also saying, we told you all along you didn't need to amend the Constitution. Why the change of heart?
Thanks, Bingwa. What you will have noticed is that there was quite extensive deliberations over this summit. And of course, what was said was that you will have to test whether Section 25 is a 2B of the Constitution provide for that kind of an expropriation without compensation. Of course, these are recommendations, these are resolutions of the workshop that are going to the National Executive Committee as a recommendation so that the NEC could be able to exercise its mind and make sure that in ultimately taking the resolution to expropriate land without compensation, it effectively looks at what are the parameters that were defined by the 54th National Conference. So there were quite a number of issues that were looked at, including the current legislation that do provide for expropriation. One such would have been, is it the National Schools Act and all of that. And actually, one of the things that was observed was that there are about 7 ministries where you could effectively begin with expropriation activities. This could be ministries where there could be land parcels that sit under those. So there's been quite an extensive process, and we did say that should it be discovered that there is a need to effect that kind of an amendment so that you could fast track this process, that will be done. Because the land issue, as you know, in South Africa is quite an emotive issue, and I don't think that the ANC is apologetic on this.
But the critics of the ANC will say that the real issue has been the failure not of the Constitution, but rather of the implementation of land reform in South Africa. The Constitution is quite clear. Section 25 doesn't talk about willing seller, willing buyer. It talks about a just and equitable compensation, which could include not expropriating without compensation.
Well, you know, we do welcome, and I think that what was said by the chairperson of the Economic Transformation Committee yesterday during the press briefing to try and outline the outcomes is that we do welcome some of those criticisms because we believe they are constructive, but they are also a call to action on our part to make sure that we move now with the necessary speed. You see, you don't, if there was a slow pace on doing things and suddenly we are accelerating, there must be an appreciation that this acceleration begins to speak to the core of the concerns of our people.
I suppose the criticism also comes from, if you look at the high-level panel, for example, that was led by former President Motlanthe, it talked a lot about the lack of policy coherence and the fact that, you know, I mean, there'd been no white paper since 1997 on this issue. And so if once again we're having debates about things that, say, legal experts and scholars are telling you, you don't necessarily need to even debate about, the critics will then say this is just political posturing. You're thinking about an election in 2019. You don't want the EFF to steal your thunder.
Well, Bingwa, it doesn't matter what 2019 carries for all of us. Land is an emotive issue for the people of this country, and it must be addressed as such. For instance, one of the things that we are beginning to do, just to show those who are our critics that we are beginning to respond, look at what is happening now in Gauteng. The provincial government of Gauteng, which is ANC-led, of course, has already begun discharging the Rapid Land Release Program under Premier Makura. And what they've also done was to declare Fridays to be title deed Fridays so that they could begin dealing with the backlog of distributing title deeds. Actually, one of the significance of our own Tomamena program when we went to Ekurhuleni last week was to also be part of the people of Tembisa when title deeds were being given out. Now, you can't say that we are responding to an electioneering a ticket when we are distributing title deeds to the rightful owners of properties. This now shows you that an ANC-led government is a responsive government. Actually, this very same constitutional review process also begins to call upon all other political parties to bring forward modalities of how this expropriation without compensation should be able to occasion itself. And we have emphasized the 2 points, public interest and public good.
You talk about these title deed Fridays that are happening in Gauteng.
Yes.
Part of the criticism, again, has been a lack of coherence and clarity around what you mean by land reform. Are we talking about redistribution? Are we talking about restitution? Are we talking about land tenure? What is the picture looking like from a rural point of view and what we are seeing in our cities?
Well, I can tell you, Bingwa, now that it's really a multi-pronged approach, touching exactly on the number of issues that we have already alluded to. One of the things that the former president, Kgalema Motlanthe, did mention was that there is also land hunger in urban areas. You know, with urbanization, what it means is that there's a great migration of people moving out of rural areas to urban centers to go and look for jobs and opportunities and all of that. So it means when those people arrive there, you'll need to make sure that you provide some settlement mechanisms for them. So now security of tenure becomes a very important issue there. So there's a multi-pronged approach. But what I'm going to say is that let us allow the National Executive Committee of the ANC, which is sitting over this weekend, to take a bite on the outcomes of the summit so that it could then be able to then say, these are the things that the ANC will put forward in the constitutional review process.
Without prejudging that
Yes.
NEC gathering, but just give me a sense of the focus of all of this. Are we looking at more urban or are we looking at more rural outcomes?
Well, I can assure you it's a multi-pronged approach.
Because the next question then says, why the assurances, for example, about food security if the focus is on urban settlements?
No, I'm not saying the focus is just on urban settlement. I'm emphasizing a point that what we're taking here is a multi-pronged approach. We'll have to make sure that you also facilitate that whole land redistribution process in your own rural areas in the same way that you do in your own urban centers. But what we will all say we have achieved is when we can ultimately see the program of expropriating land without compensation happening in such a manner that it does not cause disunity and disharmony amongst the people of South Africa. This is in the interest of people of this country, all of them, regardless of the color of their skin.
You talk about a multi-pronged approach. Do you accept the criticism, though, that there's still not much clarity around what you mean? We've seen farmers getting nervous and calling meetings and thinking their land is going to be taken. We know urban dwellers are concerned. We've had pronouncements from other parties, for example, that talk about expropriation of even suburban homes.
Yes.
The fact that even in this conversation we can't quite understand or get a commitment from you as to which way this thing is going to go. Do you accept that there's going to be the criticism that there isn't much certainty?
No, Bingo. We must be fair to the ANC. The fact that the ANC has gone out to host the inaugural land summit, bringing together various stakeholders, this begins to suggest that we are quite serious about it. I mean, I'm just saying, at some point when a party acts in the interest of its people and does things that resolves the plight of its people and guarantee them of their dignity and pride, we should be commended for that.
Sure,
we are really acting with the necessary speed. I can tell you now that the reason why I keep on referring to it being a multi-pronged approach is because I do not want us to preempt what will become the resolution of the National Executive Committee. What I can tell you is that one of the things we've done is that under the subcommittee of ETC, we've established a dedicated sub-subcommittee that looks into land issues. And in there are experts. Comrade Ronald Lamola is there, Comrade Ino Godongwani, and many others are there. But these are experts. They are now focused and saying, what are the things that the ANC need to do in the immediate to take this program further forward?
But we won't preempt what the NEC might decide in the coming days. No doubt you and I will have this conversation many times in the months ahead. But the danger, of course, is that everyone will hear what they want to hear in the messaging if it's not clear. But for now, we'll leave it there. ANC National Spokesperson Pule Mabe in the studio with us. Now, it's been a week since a group of people, including women and children, were sleeping in the open in